I've said it once and I'll say it again. I can't exactly claim to be the biggest Resident Evil fan. I mean, don't get me wrong, I love Resident Evil 4, it's one of my favourite games of all time, but I never enjoyed Resident Evil 5, and I fell asleep during Resident Evil 6, so I can't exactly say my experiences with the franchise has always been a good one. One of the many things I found severely lacking in Resi 5 and 6 was that legitimate feel of horror and tenseness-nicity. I mean, look at this. This is the franchise that once defined survival horror on the PS1. Does it still look like that franchise to you? Not at all, and you know why? Because Capcom thought survival horror wasn't profitable enough. This is why nobody likes you anymore, Capcom. Honestly, I was about ready to just give up on Resident Evil for good. I mean, if a survival horror game does a better job of being a lullaby than it does a survival horror, you know you've severely failed. But you know, going by the rules of baseball, 2 strikes does not mean you're out. I'll give this franchise one last chance to redeem itself. Which reminds me, Resident Evil Revelations is on Wii U now. So let's get into it. When it comes to the Resident Evil games, I'm never sure if I'm missing half the story or if half the story is just doing a bad job of telling me the story. But from what I understand, Jill Valentine and your buddy Parker climb aboard the Queen Zenobia to rescue Chris Redfield after he supposedly disappeared on board the ship. There are also other guys called Veltro, cities blowing up, monsters running around, but A, I don't want to spoil it, and B, I don't really understand it anyway. But the parts I do understand are good, I guess. Not bad. Well done, 10 out of 10. Either way, nobody really ever plays Resident Evil for the plot anyway, so if you're expecting Breaking Bad level storytelling, then you're gonna be out of luck. But in Resident Evil tradition, it lends itself to a lot of awful voice acting.
This is not good.
I was, you know, just asking.
This is the worst day of my life.
Okay, by this point, they have to know how bad that sounds, honestly. That has to be intentional. The main gripe I had with Resident Evil 6 was that it just wasn't scary. And then a Resident Evil game with no horror, there's no point. But personally, I found Revelations pretty scary at times, and certain sections of the game had me panicking like crazy. It wasn't exactly on par with Amnesia: The Dark Descent, but I was dreading what could be round every corner, maybe even more so than in Resi 4. I mean, don't get me wrong, like I said, Resident Evil 4 is a fantastic game, I have almost no flaws with it whatsoever, but I was kinda like, it's just a bunch of crazy people that say, Adiesta! Adiesta! I don't find that very scary. But in Revelations, they're like gooey fish, whatever that's supposed to be. I don't even, why is that? So in that regard, thumbs up to Revelations. It is pretty weird to think that Resi Revelations, a game originally on a handheld, does such a good job of making me feel as tense as it does. But as you progress through the game, you get more weapons, learn to upgrade them more, and you get used to seeing the same rehashed monsters as there isn't really much variety. But another main staple of the Resident Evil games is ammo conservation, which I felt like Revelations also did a pretty good job of here. After the first couple of enemies, I was already like, oh my god, I'm out of ammo, I'm out of ammo, please let me find some ammo before I find the next monster, please. Oh my god, there's 2 of them! It was pretty irritating at first to constantly have no ammo, but I did eventually get better at landing headshots, so it wasn't too much of a problem. Something you might have noticed while watching this review is that Revelations takes a lot of cues from Shinji Mikame's Resident Evil 4. While sadly there's no merchants, typewriters or hunigans, you'll begin to feel the similarities after you start picking up herbs, admiring scenery, needing a friend to open shutters, and pretty much shooting in general. That was a long sentence. And honestly, I can't really decide if this was a good idea or not to try and replicate it. On one hand, it does feel a little bit too familiar, but on the other hand, when it tries to do something different, it makes Resident Evil 5, 6 and Operation Raccoon City. So I guess taking that into account, it is a pretty good idea. And while Revelations is nowhere near as polished as Resident Evil 4, this is the closest a Resi game has come to being great since Resident Evil 4. But one new mechanic Revelations brings to the table is the Genesis scanner, which is pretty much just a device you can use to scan the area for secret items and herbs and whatever else. It's nothing much, but it does add a new layer of gameplay, and it really pays off if you remember to use it often. Also, the game is presented in like an episodic format, almost like you're watching a series on DVD. While it isn't exactly a new feature in games, I've seen it done before in Alone in the Dark, among others, it is a pretty cool feature. Though I don't really feel like it makes as much sense being on the Wii U version as it does the 3DS version, as with it being a handheld console, it would promote playing in short bursts, but it's still a cool feature, either way, I guess. But as tense and panicky as I admit this game makes me feel, it's got just as many bad points as it has good. First off, the camera is pretty stiff, and I'm not talking about the tank controls that Resident Evil has kinda made a tradition now, I mean the camera controls in general. It can also make walking around the Queen Zenobia feel kinda clunky at times. I'm not sure if it's a problem with the gamepad or what, but either way, this is where it really starts to show that it's a port of a 3DS game. Not only that, but one of my biggest gaming peeves ever is present in this game. An AI partner that does nothing. Hey, don't be mean to trouble you, but I'm kind of in danger, so if you want to help me out, that'd be great. Kind of need your help over here. But that isn't even the worst thing. There was a point where I needed to shoot a lock off a door to progress, but I had no more ammo. My AI partner Parker could have easily have shot it off, knowing I had no more ammo, or I could just search the entire freaking map looking for one stinking ammo box. You know, I'm really starting to wonder why I even need you here at all, Parker. Also, while the graphics are mostly pretty good, there are a lot of crappy looking textures. But, you know, I'm fine with letting that one slide. I'm not expecting a port of a 3DS game to represent the graphical capabilities of a next-gen console. Also, there are a lot of pretty bad load time, something that I find is a common problem with the Wii U. And finally, during the boss fights, respawning enemies. Cheap! Cheap! If the severely unhelpful AI wasn't enough to make this annoying as hell, the rarity of finding ammo is. But overall, Resident Evil Revelations is a pretty solid game. It might not have made the most graceful transition over to the Wii U, and it might not exactly make up for Resident Evil 6, but it's great to see that survival horror isn't totally dead in the Resident Evil franchise. With weird locked doors, terrible voice acting, and less shotgun shells than I've had healthy meals, this truly is a Resident Evil game. Wait, what the hell? Did I really write that about healthy meals? What the hell was that about? And hopefully, after Resident Evil 6 getting the crappy reviews it did, hopefully Capcom will begin to realise that maybe survival horror is profitable after all. And so that's pretty much my thoughts on Resident Evil Revelations, but for this review, let's get a second opinion. Today, Jake from BecauseVideogames.
Hey everybody, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be on one of my favorite channels, FarfetchdReviews. I'm Jake Baldino from Pretty Much It and BecauseVideogames and stuff like that, and I'm here to continue the conversation of the Resident Evil Revelations review. I think Resident Evil Revelations is going to divide people just because of the fact that it still feels like a 3DS game a bit. It is kind of small feeling. It feels a little low budget at times. But at the same time, what I really liked about it is that it retains the Resident Evil charm and feeling to it that I feel like Resident Evil 6 totally lost. I do feel like this is an in-between between like a Resident Evil 5, 4, and 5 feel game and 6. It's kind of like a happy medium, and I have to say, while it's not perfect, it works much more for me than Resident Evil 6 did, that's for sure. While I still think Capcom really needs to figure out now that we need to shoot more things, we need more bullets, and ammo needs to be balanced more accordingly, the shooting controls do work great, and the fact that you can move now slowly while aiming doesn't really make a big difference, but it helps. Like I said, while this feels like a small game, it certainly feels like a Resident Evil game, especially from the hammy, corny dialogue, the silly, over-the-top characters, and kinda goofy, nonsensical plot that in this one I actually understood and had a grip on, and the way it is told is very unlike a Resident Evil game. The way that you move back and forth throughout points of the story with different characters, I thought that was really cool. Some of the characters, though, I absolutely hated. Both Jill and Chris's partner characters are absolutely dim-witted, and I don't remember their names, and I think that goes to show how unimportant they are and how terrible their dialogue really was. But at the same time, that still kind of feels like a good thing. Like, I can't stress how much that kind of still makes it all feel like a good old-fashioned Resident Evil game. There is a sense of creepiness to this. There is backtracking. There is doors with special keys. You even drain a bathtub at one point in a terrifying scene, which totally reminded me of the original Resident Evil, in which I pooped my pants. So I do say to you guys, if it hasn't been said on here already, that, you know, it's worth checking out if you're a Resident Evil fan. Whether or not you feel burned by the 6th one, or if you liked it, I still think this is a good one that everyone should really experience. Even though it is certainly not perfect, it is a good time for a nice little weekend play, and I think that's worth checking out. So that's about it for me giving a second opinion. I'm Jake Baldino. You can follow me on Twitter at Jake Baldino. You can find me on youtube.com/BecauseVideogames and stuff like that. So I'll see you guys later.
And so it looks like Resident Evil isn't out of the park yet. Not until the next game anyway. But I mean, despite its problems, it is still a pretty solid Resident Evil game, which I couldn't exactly say for Resident Evil 5 or 6. And you know, unfortunately, while I don't feel like the Resi franchise will ever come close to being like Resi 4 ever again, it's still a pretty good try. Oh, by the way, I just want to give a shout out to my boy Parker for all your help during the story, all your AI help. I couldn't have done it without you, Parker. Thanks a lot, buddy! Want to catch up with all the latest Farfetched news, maybe you want to see some behind the scenes stuff, or just ask me a question, either way, like my page on Facebook, which you can find in the description below. Thank you so much to Jake from BecauseVideogames for being my first ever guest of Second Opinion. Go watch his videos on BecauseVideogames, because if I like them, I think you will too. Click the other annotations to watch some of my other stuff, or click the Farfetched icon on the right to subscribe. Anyway, I've got to go. The warden says prisoners are only allowed on the internet till 8 PM. See you next time.